Hello and welcome to another episode of We Are What We Read. This is actually the 11th episode in our 12 episode commitment to this series. I hope that you all have been watching each episode with so many great suggestions. As always, I'm Kristopher Zgorski and I'm joined by my co-host Shawn Reilly Simmons. How are you doing, Shawn?
I'm doing great. Everything is going well. I can't believe it's been almost a year we've been doing this. It's insane.
Really
But
hard
it's
to
been
believe.
so yeah, it's been so fun, and every episode I'm inspired to go spend more money at the bookstore. So I think that's the whole point.
I think that's what's happened to us all. You think you know every book, and then something comes along, and you're like, I got to order that one. And I'm sure that will happen with our cast tonight. We're going to jump right in. Our first guest this evening is Donna Andrews. Donna was born in Yorktown, Virginia, and now lives in Reston. She began writing stories in grade school and eventually figured out how to get them published. Murder with Peacocks, St. Martin's Press 1999, won a bunch of awards and launched her long-running Meg Laszlo series. Between a Flock and a Hard Place, which comes out in August 2024, will be book 35 in that series. Rocking Around the Chickadees in October will be book 26, and she is now hard at work on number 37 for Duck's Sake. Yes, she likes puns. And welcome tonight, Donna.
Thank you. And you told me to pick a book that was influential, and I realized that one of the books that really helped shape me as the mystery writer I am was Freddie the Detective by Walter R. Brooks. Yes, it's a children's book. I'm juvenile. Uh, Actually, I read this when I was age appropriate for it. It's for like grade school kids, but it holds up really well today. Even though it was published in 1932, Freddie the Detective is the smallest and cleverest of the pigs on the bean farm, where all the animals can talk. Clearly, this is a vegetarian farm because over the course of the life of the series from 1927 to 1958, Freddie never gets turned into a sausage. He remains there running the show. And in Freddie the Detective, Freddie is running a lending library out of one corner of his pig pen, and he gets hold of a copy of one of the Sherlock Holmes books and is smitten. He decides he wants to be a detective. And since Sherlock Holmes has Watson as a sidekick, uh, Freddie recruits Mrs. Wiggins, one of the cows, to be his Watson. It reminds me in a way of Dan Stashower's Harry Houdini series, in which Harry Houdini, the Sherlock Holmes figure, isn't really the brilliant detective he thinks he is, and the Watson figure, Dash Hardin, is more is like the sensible one. Mrs. Wiggins contributes a lot more than Watson does to the mystery. And in this book, Freddie solves a bunch of crimes like the disappearance of a baby rabbit, and the grand, the big theme uh, is that Jinx the cat, Freddie's best friend, is accused of murdering a bird. They find a pile of feathers and bones, and Simon the rat, Freddie suspects that Simon the rat has framed Jinx for this murder because Simon and his family want to eat all the grain stored in the barn, and they can't if Jinx is running around free. And so is Jinx guilty, or has he been framed? And even if he's been framed, can Freddie prove it? One of the reasons I like this, it's a funny mystery series. It's like a cozy mystery for kids. The series aren't all mysteries. Some of them are just adventures, although they do often solve crimes. One of the things that I mean, I was very influenced by it because I read it along with the Hardy Boys and Alfred Hitchcock's Three Investigators, and it probably helped me decide that a humorous mystery was one of the things I wanted to write. Over the course of the series, Freddie does a lot of different things. There's Freddie the politician, Freddie the pilot, Freddie in the Bean Home News when he starts a newspaper, Freddie the magician, Freddie plays football. I kind of learned subconsciously from that, you got to bring in interesting new stuff to keep the series fresh. And I honestly think one of the humor works for kids, it works for grown-ups. I reread it a couple of years ago. It still holds up, and it's nearly 100 years ago, so that's saying something. It's got one of the most dramatic trial scenes in literature, and I remember, and speaking of Anthony Boucher, who, along with J. Francis McComas, critics of the speculative fiction genre, they praised one of the Freddie books, saying it, quote, offers wit, sound structural plotting, genuine character humor, and admirable English prose. So even Anthony Boucher was a fan of Freddie. And as a side note, Walter R. Brooks, who wrote the Freddie books, also wrote the short stories on which the TV series Mr. Ed was based. So a very influential short story writer, influential writer. I highly recommend starting your mystery-loving kids with Freddie the Detective. They might turn out to be a writer. You never know.
I love that. That's so great. I haven't read the Freddie books, and that's surprising because I love books for younger readers. I'm so happy when people bring books for younger readers to the show. You're
And
not
they're
the
back,
first. So, yeah,
and they're back in print.
awesome. Well, everyone has to, I'm gonna have to grab some and check it out. I didn't know that the Mr. Ed connection too. That's very cool. Well, thanks for bringing that to us, Donna. It's always good to see you. Um, yeah. Our next guest is Glen Erik Hamilton. Glen Erik Hamilton's novels have won the Anthony, McCavity, and Strand Magazine Critics Awards, and been nominated for the Edgar, Barry, and Nero Awards. His series featuring reformed thief Van Shaw has been called outstanding by Publishers Weekly, perfect mix of serious crime and caper movie by Criminal Element, and a must-read series by Mystery Scene Magazine. Very, very high praise. The latest, Island of Thieves, was named one of USA Today's 5 books not to miss. Wow, only 5 books not to miss. Sometimes those lists are like 100. A native of Seattle, Glen grew up aboard a sailboat, playing around the islands, marinas, and commercial docks of the Pacific Northwest, and I assume reading lots of books. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Shawn, and thank you, Chris and Shawn, for having me here. My book is Gorky Park by Martin Cruz Smith. It is the first of what eventually became a series. It was probably written as a standalone to begin with. I don't have a copy of Gorky Park with me. My beloved old copy from the early 80s is in storage. I do have another in the series just to hold up, Tatiana, also by the same author, of course, Martin Cruz Smith. I read Gorky Park in my early teens, and it was beyond formative. It's the first mystery novel I can remember reading that was more than just a puzzle to be solved. It offered everything that we might expect from literature. I didn't know it then, but the book's level of writing and its aspirations planted some seeds and eventually made me want to become a writer as well. It focuses on Arkady Renko. Renko is the chief investigator for the Moscow militia, essentially the city's police force. And it's often at odds with the state security KGB, who of course hold the real power. And the mystery centers on 3 bodies found frozen under the snow of Gorky Park with their identifying features removed. And the victims turn out to be linked with highly influential members of government and of Moscow society. Gorky Park is a murder mystery, but it's less about who done it than why, and about how those involved are likely to get away with it because of the corruption of the system at all levels. Renko himself is an idealist, and that's a word that might surprise even him. But he is the honest person in a crumbling society where it seems everyone has to be out for themselves just to survive. He's supposed to solve the crime, but only in a way that doesn't rock the boat. And if he pushes too hard, the command structure is more than capable of pushing back, up to and including making him disappear entirely. Gorky Park's a classic thriller, but it's also a political thriller. It's an examination of the Soviet Union in what turned out to be its final moments. And it's a star-crossed love story to boot, as Renko becomes deeply involved with a witness who risks becoming another victim herself. And probably the best reason to recommend it, it has some absolutely beautiful writing. I'll read a paragraph here. It's an example that I've used in a class I teach on effective use of settings. The Moscow town prosecutor's office was south of the river on Novokuznetskaya Street in a section of 19th century shops. The office building itself was divided down the middle into a yellow 2-story side and a gray 3-story side. The investigators on the yellow half looked out onto a sad and tiny park where citizens called for interrogation could sit and despair. In the park were a flower bed the size of a grave and empty flower urns on swivel bases. From the other side of the building, the larger side, the prosecutor looked down on a playground. So, as you can see here, even the building is two-faced. It's ominous, it's neglected, it's potentially deadly, and ultimately it's very class conscious, which is a key focus of the book. The power wielded by an elite few in a supposedly classless society. Renko himself is at face value one of these elites. As the son of one of Stalin's favorite generals, he's part of the nomenklatura, the named ones who run the country. But his fundamental decency prevents him from rising in the ranks, even as it drives him to be the best investigator that he can be and bring guilty to justice. Gorky Park, highly recommended novel, and it was made into a pretty good movie back in 1983 starring William Hurt and Lee Marvin. So you get a double-barreled recommendation today. Check them both out. Thanks very much, Chris and Shawn.
Thanks, Glenn. I actually first discovered it through the movie as well, and then I went back to read the book. I think I probably avoided the book because the Russian intimidated me, so I just was like, let me not read that. But I did love the movie, and then I did eventually read the book and read several of the series. I don't think I've read the whole series, but I did read several of them. So that's a great suggestion. Thanks for bringing it to us. Our next guest is Leslie Karst. Leslie gets the award for probably zooming in from the furthest away. Leslie is the author of the new Orchid Isle mystery Molten Death, which I just recently finished and loved, and of the Lefty Award nominated Sally Solari mystery series and the memoir Justice is Served, A Tale of Scallops, the Law, and Cooking for RBG. After years waiting tables and singing in a new wave rock band, she decided she was ready for a real job and ended up at Stafford Law School, then returned to school to study the culinary arts. Now retired from the law, Leslie splits her time between Hilo, Hawaii and Santa Cruz, California, spending her days writing, cooking, cycling, gardening, and observing cocktail hour promptly at 5 o'clock. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Kristopher and Shawn, for inviting me to participate in this amazing, terrific initiative you've started. I'm honored to be here with you two and with all the rest of you authors. So the first mysteries that I read were preteen through teenage. My mom was a big fan of the Golden Age mysteries. So the first book she ever handed me to read that was a mystery, I believe, was Nemesis by Agatha Christie. And I remember that because I didn't know what the word meant, and I had to ask her. And so I fell in love with Lord Peter Wimsey, and I loved all those books, and I read them all through junior high and high school. And then in college, I became obsessed with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. And so I started reading Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and noirs and hard-boileds. And I always thought of these two genres as being completely different from each other. And I never really thought about it much. But then in 1982, out comes Sue Grafton's A is for Alibi. Here it is. And this is an ancient copy. And when I read that, it came as an awakening to me, because here was a book in the traditional weary PI style, but it was written by and about a woman. Very different. And then as I read on, I realized that she'd actually created a sort of a hybrid between hard-boiled and what we would now call cozy mysteries. I'm sure most of you watching this have at least, if not read her books, at least know about them. But so I won't talk too much about that. But basically, her protagonist is Kinsey Milhone, a 30-something, I think she's about 35, private investigator in Santa Teresa, also, thinly disguised Santa Barbara, California. And in many ways, she is the classic PI. She's a loner with no strings attached. She talks about in the first chapter of the first book, my apartment is small, I don't have pets, and I don't have houseplants, which totally sounds like something, you'd read in Raymond Chandler or something. But at the same time, this gal has a huge heart. She also says, I'm a nice person. I have a lot of friends. So right off the bat, you've got this sort of disconnect between the two sort of traditional genres. And I recently, when I found out I was going to be here today, thank you, I reread it because I hadn't read it, I don't think, since probably the 90s. And I had forgotten just how funny she is, which truly I think is the main thing that affected me the most. She's, yes, a little on the snarky side. Who doesn't love that? And here, I'm going to read you a little short passage because this will give you a feel for her writing style. Here we go. This is from chapter 1 of A is for Alibi. It had not been a very satisfying day, but then most of my days are the same. Checking and cross-checking, filling in blanks, detail work that was absolutely essential to the job, but scarcely dramatic stuff. The basic characteristics of any good investigator are a plodding nature and infinite patience. Society has inadvertently been grooming women to this end for years. So I don't know, I love that. Anyway, her books are funny, they're smart, they're snarky and sarcastic. By the way, for those of you who have never got the chance to meet Sue or hear her speak at any of the mystery conventions, I can tell you she was a lot like Kinsey. She was sassy, sarcastic, funny as hell, and with a little bit of a mouth of a sailor. So a great gal. Anyway, since this A is for Alibi has come out, and then all the other books that she painstakingly released year after year, the numerous authors have emulated her style, and as a result, I think largely due to Sue Grafton, the line between soft and hard crime fiction is now less rigid. There have been lots of new genres. One of, I like to call, there's heartfelt noir now in a way that there didn't used to be. And my favorite genre, and I believe nobody else calls it this, but I call them snarky cozies. Because, and I was inspired by that too. When I first came up with my character, Sally Solari, I gotta say it was influenced a lot by Kinsey because she's pretty snarky, and mine are she's not a PI, she's an amateur sleuth, but so they're more soft-boiled than Sue Grafton's books. But definitely I was inspired, and my character was inspired by Kinsey, and I can't thank her enough for that. So there you go. A is for Alibi.
Yay, great job. Great shout outs. It's always good to see you, fellow chef person. I love hanging out with you. You're so fun and your books are amazing. And that's a great recommendation. And this is like one of my biggest moments in the mystery community. She walked into a room and she knew who I was. She was talking to someone. She goes, "Oh yeah, I know Shawn." And it was like the equivalent of like Bruce Springsteen pulling me up on stage and I was like, "Oh God, she knows who I am." Yeah, so she was amazing. Yeah, a wonderful person in our community. So, but thank you, Leslie. It's always good to see you, and thanks for being here. Good
Thanks
rec.
to both of you.
Our next guest is Kim Powers. Kim Powers is a two-time Emmy-winning journalist and author of the novels Rules for Being Dead, Capote in Kansas, Dig Two Graves, as well as the critically acclaimed memoir, The History of Swimming, a Barnes & Noble Discover book, and Lambda Literary Award finalist for Best Memoir of the Year. He also wrote the festival favorite indie film Finding North and the one-woman play Sidekick about Vivian Vance of Ethelmert's fame. We know who Vivian Vance is. Powers is also the senior writer for ABC's 2020, part of the team that has received an unprecedented 4 consecutive Edward R. Murrow Awards. A native Texan, he was one of Out Magazine's Out 100 and received an MFA in, I'm going to say it wrong, dramaturgy. I got it. From the Yale School of Drama. I did not go to Yale. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you so much. It suddenly hit me when you were saying that I think most of us kind of write in the mystery world, and some of the viewers are. And 2020 is almost exclusively crime now, true crime, courtroom related, suspense driven, which was not when I started there a long time ago. So I always had a sort of peripheral interest in it, and now I am steeped deep in it week after week. And one of the things I'm doing, I'm constantly looking for new story ideas. So Googling them, Googling true crime, etc. So, like when you're on a search engine like Amazon or something, and it comes up with, other books you may be interested in. All of mine that pop up are the goriest, bloodiest, most horrible true crime things you can imagine, which is not really who I am at all. But that's the world I live in. But anyway, thank you so much for inviting me to this. I'm the book I am going to suggest is a book I love that I think everybody should know about, but also sort of a late in life influence to me more than an early before I began my writing career. And it's a somewhat underknown book by Joanne Harris, who wrote Chocolat, which was her debut book and her big bestseller. But this is a book called Gentlemen and Players. And Chris knows it. I know we discussed this. And it came out in 2003. And it was the first, and like I think Glen said, I don't know if it started out about Arcady's books. I don't know if it started out meaning to be the start of a series, but it did ultimately become the first book in a three-part series, all about the same creepy, decaying private boys' school in England called St. Oswald's. And I think that was the first thing that sort of drew it to me, because I'm kryptonite for that world. It is a world as far afield from the world I grew up in, which was McKinney, Texas, population 18,000. A private British boys' school was not in the cards for me, but I don't know how I discovered it. I think, like most of us in a bookstore, I'm just pulling down things on shelves, looking at it. I had not read Chocolat, which the little bit I knew about it, I thought was maybe a little too twee for me. But I was really drawn to this book. And it is no. I mean, I was looking up on Amazon, for instance. It has over, something like 4,500 great reviews. None other than Val McDermott, who we all know, called it a vastly underappreciated, not underrated, underappreciated book, which is how it feels to me. Like more people should know about it. And another critic called one of the books in the series, but it's very applicable to this, a cross between Goodbye, Mr. Chips and The Bad Seed, which is kind of a perfect description. And there's so many twists and turns in it. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but basically it is about, as I said, this, past its sell due date boys' school, St. Oswald's, about the head teacher there, an old man who's been there gazillions of years teaching classics, a young professor, a 30-something, 40-something professor who comes in not only to modernize the school and to shake things up, but as you bit by bit discover, comes in to destroy the school flat out for reasons we don't know at first. And then a third main character who exists in sort of a flashback 20 years ago of a kid, a young boy, who was the son of the school porter, essentially the school janitor. He was the poor boy in this world of elites and the 1%. He was me. He was my gateway into this world, and he loved being able to be sort of part of the school, but not part of it at the same time. Loved running along the slate roofs of the school, so many dark recesses of this Gothic architecture sort of disappearing into that. And, bit by bit, you come to realize over the course of the book how they all intermingle and what happens. It's very much this cat and mouse game. And I don't know if I would call it a thriller, because it has this sort of English reserve to it and this kind of a little bit of a stiff upper lip, but a very, very sort of intense mystery. But one of the ways in which it was instructive to me is my first book had already come out at that point, this memoir, which is all first person. my next three books all began sort of fracturing the storytelling structure and started being told from multiple points of view. Not a lot, but multiple. And the way Joanne Harris managed this and juggled all these different characters was so illuminating to me. And but it's a little tricky because in this book, the three main characters are all told in first person. So if you're not paying careful attention, you sort of, just turn the page and you think you're still reading the same character. And it sort of sneaks up on you a little bit unaware. Oh, I'm in another time place. I'm in another, mindset. But rather than being, a problematic issue, I saw it as something very deliberate, that she was trying to sort of get at this quality of dislocation and almost like decay that this, especially the older professor, is going through in this. Like, what is happening to the school? Where am I now? Do I want to stand up for the past and sort of preserve this heritage that's being passed down through Latin, or do I need to sort of get with the future and sort of move on? So to me, it was sort of a little bit of a deliberate choice. And there's also a great pleasure in reading a book numerous times through the year. We say these books we're talking about are some of our favorite books that influenced us. I imagine we go back to them. So reading this literally over a 20-year period, probably 3 or 4 times, because the prose is so exquisite. And I'll sometimes do a sort of brush up before I begin digging into a new book. And I'll just read, a handful of pages of it. And I can just random pull some out. And they're all so beautifully and deeply felt and written. I feel like, the bar has been set for me. But reading it, you go into sort of points of identification with the different characters. I was the young renegade kid, with his face pressed against the wall of the candy store when I first read it. Next time I read it, 5 or 6 years later, I was the 30-something, 40-something professor who would come in, trying to not rock the boat too much, trying to, just get the lay of the land. Now, when I reread it right before this, I'm the old professor, wondering why I'm still sticking up for, why students should study or read Latin or something. It's very different for me. But the other key thing is that there's a huge twist in it. And I'm pretty well read, but I think even at that point, I thought this was the most astounding twist in a piece of literature that I had ever read. There's one, just out of the blue, mentioning Val McDermott in her great book, Place of Execution. There's another huge twist like that in that book. And you can only read that twist once. It's like, you always remember your first time, but you go back to it, reading up to it, and you read things in a very different way. Like, what are the clues she's planting? What I should have looked at. So she very much instructed me on kind of juggling voices, differentiation of voices, how to kind of create a very slow burn thriller, without a lot of big pyrotechnics or anything. The other thing I wanted to mention about is I love the fall. I love autumn. It's my favorite season. There's an Archibald MacLeish quote, I praise the fall, it is the human season. And all of my books have sort of major scenes taking place then. I don't know if she knows this, but it feels like it takes place in a sort of permanent autumn. Again, part and parcel thematically with everything she's describing about the decay of the school. But it seems like she goes through a few weeks in autumn and describes, the leaves falling, it getting darker earlier, it getting creepy so you don't have the same kind of sense of location or your landmarks to guide you about. Your whole sense of place has been sort of dislocated. And so I just want to read a little again a sort of a sort of anthem to autumn that she sort of pulls through all three of these books that I think is so exquisite. I like autumn, the drama of it, the golden lion roaring through the back door of the year, shaking its mane of leaves. A dangerous time of violent rages and deceptive calm, of fireworks in the pockets and conkers in the fist. It is the season in which I felt closest to the boy I was, and at the same time, closest to death. It is St. Oswald's at its most beautiful, gold among the lindens, its tower howling like a throat. And that sort of sums up this friction she has about it being such a sexy, sinuous, crinkly time where you're not freezing cold, but you're cold, and that kind of creates certain bodily sensations and excitement, but also you're letting go of the past and what has just come and getting ready for hibernation. So I just think she's an exquisite prose stylist, credible mystery writer, little known books, and you get the pleasure in the two books after it of continuing with these characters you kind of fall in love with. So that's why I think we should all take another look or take a fresh look at Gentlemen and Players by Joanne Harris.
Thanks so much, Kim. It doesn't take very long after someone meets me for them to learn that I love academic mysteries more than just about anything.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was my gateway into that world from her. I did read Chocolat as well and loved it. I think that probably the reason she's not more popular than she is, I think she's a little too literary for the genre readers.
Yeah.
Little too genre for the literary
exactly.
reader. So she sort of is doing a line that's a tough one to cross sometimes, but she does it beautifully. So
and
I hope
each of
more
her
people
books is so wildly different. This is sort of academic noir, which I love, sort of like you. So yeah, thank you guys.
Check it out, people. This is a great recommendation. Our next guest is Grace Topping. Grace Topping, a USA Today bestselling author and Agatha Award finalist, is the author of the Laura Bishop Mystery Series. A recovering technical writer, she is now creating murder mysteries and killing off characters who remind her of some of the people she dealt with during her career. She is a member of the Mystery Writers of America, the Chessy chapter of Sisters in Crime, the Sync Guppies, where she serves on the steering committee, and she is here with us today. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you, Kristopher, and thank you for inviting me, and hello, Shawn. The book I've chosen is Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Winspear. It's a book I always recommend to people who are looking for a mystery, especially historical mysteries. It's a book that I turn to when I'm feeling stressed or need comforting, and we all need a bit of escapism occasionally, because Maisie Dobbs is comforting. Jacqueline Winspear wrote Maisie Dobbs as a standalone, but it proved to be so popular, winning an Agatha for first best novel, that she went on to write 17 national best-selling books in the series. Sadly, the last one is coming out June the 4th, The Comfort of Ghosts. There are a lot of sad readers out there who are definitely going to miss this series. So what was it about Maisie Dobbs that makes me continually recommend it? It's the character of Maisie. This is definitely a character-driven mystery, not only the character of Maisie, but the well-developed characters that surround her. It's a book that had me stop reading on occasion to ponder something she did or said and thought, gosh, that was so wise. Her character is richly developed with each book in the series. It's also a book that I think would be appropriate for either gender and even for younger readers. Maisie is a gentle soul, but she doesn't shy away from cases that are serious and at times dangerous, including wartime espionage. She would fit right into Foyle's war. We first meet Daisy as she's hanging out her shingle as a psychologist and private investigator. Strange mix. It's in 1920s London. We later learned that she had entered into service at age 11 into a manor house prior to the First World War. Her employers find her reading in their library in the middle of the night. and discovering how smart she is. They have her tutored by a psychologist who lives nearby. That greatly changes the direction of her life. We also follow her in the book, her service during the First World War as a nurse, and the hardships and the losses that she experienced. And perhaps it's those experiences and her ability to straddle different classes of society in Britain that make her such a wise character. As a psychologist, she is concerned about the people involved in the cases that she takes on as a private investigator. Reading the series and all the Maisie Dobbs and the series has made me a better person. You know, you read things that she's written and covered and you go, yes, this is really a good person. I'd like to emulate her. There's even a Facebook page, What Would Maisie Do?, where readers post their favorite passages and contemplate how Maisie has handled, how she has handled things and how she could handle things in their lives. How would she help them? I highly recommend Maisie Dobbs and the other books in the series, especially in audio. The narrator, Orla Cassidy, sounds just like you would expect Maisie to sound, calming, confident, and caring. If you listen, I think you'll find that she's definitely the voice of Maisie. If you read Maisie Dobbs, you'll be turning to it time and again. Every few years, I itch to start the series again in audio. Listening to it soothes my soul.
Great seeing you as always, and that's a great recommendation. And yeah, Jacqueline had come to Malice many times and was lovely, and she's got a huge fan base. So, and you're in charge of the fan club, but that's great. I'm glad to see.
The last
Always
book
good to
coming out, so sad.
I know I'm not a good person with endings. Like I'll just like on purpose not watch the last season of a TV show. So because then it lives forever. I don't have to stop. But you know, eventually things do come to it. But I'm sure it's gonna be a wonderful send off, and we've enjoyed the ride, so that's great. But always good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Take
Our
care.
last but definitely not least guest tonight is Sandra SG Wong. Sandra SG Wong, pronouns she, her, writes fiction across genres. The cross-genre Lola Stark novels and Crescent City short stories have garnered Crime Writers of Canada Awards of Excellence, finalist nominations. The best-selling standalone thriller In the Dark We Forget was an Anthony Award finalist. In addition to being a speaker, mentor, and community organizer, Sandra is a past president of Sisters in Crime. Thank you for your service. I enjoyed working with you a bit during that, and an active member of Crime Writers of Color. Connect with her via sgwong.com. Everyone has to follow you. So welcome to the show, Sandra.
Thanks so much, Shawn, for having me here. Thanks to both you and Kristopher for the invitation. And before, I'm going to take up some of my precious minutes to say congratulations, Kristopher, on your Amelia. So excited for you. So well deserved.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this. I love everyone's recommendations. And you know what I really love is how passionate everyone is about these books. So I'm just such a nerd for books. I'm sure we all are, so it's not a surprise. So I have chosen All Systems Red by Martha Wells. As you can tell from the cover, it is science fiction. So the reason I find it inspiring is Martha Wells has been publishing since 1993. That was her debut year. And it's a novella. It's very slim. It's a novella, and it came out in 2017. And before that, she was extremely well regarded, prolific writer in fantasy and science fiction. And then she published this. This is the first novella in a series called The Murderbot Diaries. And it just exploded. It won all the awards you can imagine in science fiction. It became a New York Times bestselling book. The whole series, everyone that comes out is on that list. And there are, I think, 5 novellas and 1 novel and counting. You better bet I've got my pre-order on the next one coming out this year. So let me the reason it's inspiring for me, let me get back to that, is because she just, kept writing, just doing her thing. And she wasn't like an explosively best-selling author, for most of her career until lately. And so that's just inspiring to me, and a reminder to just keep doing what I'm doing, like for all of us, right? As authors, just keep doing what you're doing. And eventually, I think you will find your audience. Yes, we would all love to be like Martha Wells. She's got an Apple TV series based on Murderbot coming out. So, she doesn't need me pimping her books for her, but but here we are. So let me set up. It's science fiction, and maybe not everyone who's watching this series is into science fiction. So the world that Murderbot takes place in, and I will explain that name soon, it's a far future where there is faster than light space travel. So there's also, however, corporate colonization. So corporations are in charge. There are a few what they're called freehold communities and planets, but for the most part, it's corporations and conglomerates that are traveling and taking over planets. So in All Systems Red, this is book 1, we are on a far-flung planet in that far future, and there's a group of a crew of scientists who are doing a survey. And so there's an unknown hostile force, and this crew has rented a security android. And against the android's advice, the crew of scientists decide that they have to investigate what's happened after they discover that another survey crew has disappeared on the planet. That's like a very, very basic. So the thing about All Systems Red and the entire Murderbot Diaries series is there's mystery, there's suspense, there's action, adventure. There is so much humor, and there is, most importantly, there's heart. And where most of that comes from is the first person narrator, who is Murderbot. So Murderbot is, in the terms of the book, is an imitative human bot unit. It's a construct. There are organic parts, which are from human DNA, and there are inorganic parts, which are robotic. So we would maybe say a cyborg, but it's not really. And it is very much an it. It refers to itself as it. Martha Wells has done such an incredible job in creating Murderbot, who is so unique. And I wanted to read just literally the opening paragraph. This is how Martha Wells introduces us to Murderbot. I could have become a mass murderer after I hacked my governor module, but then I realized I could access the combined feed of entertainment channels carried on the company satellites. It had been well over 35,000 hours or so since then, with still not much murdering, but probably, I don't know, a little under 35,000 hours of movies, serials, books, plays, and music consumed. As a heartless killing machine, I was a terrible failure. That is the tone. This character is so engaging, so compelling, so funny. And within just this novel alone, but then the rest of the series, we really get to explore some themes that are quite contemporary to us as readers. Things like, poverty still exists in this far-flung future. So things like indentured servitude still exists. And then ethical issues that we are dealing with now about enslavement and robotics and things like that, and artificial intelligence. So it's just an amazing, incredible world. And I have probably read this series 4 or 5 times already, and it only started in 2017. So you can imagine every time I read, I do find something new. So not only as a reader who's a huge fan, but also as a writer, just looking at the way that Martha Wells has, and I just struck me. I always say her name, her full name, Martha Wells. I'm just really struck by how Ms. Wells is able to create this character who can become so close to our hearts, but yet is very much something that we're not used to seeing. It has no gender. It isn't it, but it is a person. So it's just really great. This series is fantastic. The action and adventure is really engaging, and it is funny as all get out. So that is my recommendation, and I hope anyone who's not used to reading sci-fi please take your time with it. There may be some stuff in there that you're not understanding, like what does this technology mean? But Ms. Wells does a great job of embedding explanations as she goes and contextualizing. So there's not huge, data dumps unless they're warranted and they're used for a reason. So yeah, so I hope anyone who picks it up enjoys it.
Thanks so much, Sandra. I love a cross-genre book. I have heard of Martha Wells. I've never read her, and as the host of this show, I get a preview of what people are picking. So I have to admit, I already ordered it. So hopefully it'll be here soon, and I will be reading it. So I can't wait. So thank you for that suggestion. As always, we like to end our evening with a look forward. We've been spending looking back with our guests, and Shawn and I like to highlight something that's coming up in the coming weeks that we would like to promote. So I've chosen this time a book that's not in the mystery genre. I've chosen James by Percival Everett. It just came out this week. Percival Everett is the author of Erasure, on which the Oscar Award nominated movie American Fiction was based. James is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective. I think that it's important that we all realize that the characters we create, and even our very own selves, we always center ourselves in the story. We are the hero of our own journey, but there's other stories going on, and Percival is going to give us a look at what's happening to Jim as they're going down the river. Since we already know so much about what Huckleberry was going through. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I haven't began. It came in just the other day, so it's my weekend read, so I can't wait. So that's my suggestion. What are you bringing for us, Shawn?
Ooh, it's a great weekend because it's going to be like pouring rain, so it'll be a great weekend read. It's one of those weekends there'll be a lot of reading caught up on. My book this time is also not quite a mystery, although this writer writes in mystery sometimes. It's You Like It Darker by Stephen King. For a couple reasons. So I just had a birthday between these episodes. I turned 53, and I just figured out I've been in a reading love affair with this man for 40 years because I started reading him way too young. Way too young. I was reading Stephen King novels, and my mom's like, "Yep, go right ahead. It's totally fine." So I think my little soft little brain was that's why I'm such a weirdo today. I was very impacted by Stephen King for a very long time. He's my favorite author for a very long time. And it's also a collection of short stories. And he was one of the first writers that I thought, oh, short stories are super cool. And I love I like writing short stories. I like reading short stories. And I love that he, is the top of the mountain and he still writes short stories. So I think it's wonderful that for those reasons, I'm looking forward to You Like It Darker. It's also got a cool cover.
I'm looking forward to that too, as a King fan. In fact, I think he just released the TOC this week, and I saw that one of the short stories is called Rattlesnakes, and it has parentheses at the end of it says a sequel to Cujo. So I'm interested to see what exactly that's going to be all about. So that's a great.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, I noticed that too. I'm like, oh no, please. That was one of the ones I read when I was like way too young.
Exactly. So that's a great suggestion. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for another episode of We Are What We Read. Again, this was the 11th. We have one more in the year-long series that will be out in April. So I hope you'll join us for that. And if you've missed any of the previous ones, I hope you'll go back and watch them. There's always great suggestions, as there were tonight. And until then, read often and read widely. Thanks so much, guys.